Hey, what's up, everybody? This is GameLogIQ from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going Weekly Games podcast on YouTube, and one of the co-hosts of the Basement Radio Arcade podcast on YouTube. Back with another episode of the Enough to Keep Going Weekly Games podcast. This is episode number 337 on the evening of May 5th in the year of our gaming 2024. Here with me, as almost normally, pretty much most of the time always, is my partner in crime, Mr. DBQ Hams. How you doing, DBQ?
That is the strongest recommendation that anybody could give me. Almost always, sometimes maybe, but he's still around. We've tried to get rid of him, but he still keeps coming back. So yes, I am good, and I even know that it is May 5th without having to check the date. So glad to be here. We got plenty to talk about, as we always do. So thanks for keeping us moving tonight.
Yeah, I'm having a few problems with my ergos. This is a slightly new setup. Not a new setup, but I haven't been over here in a while. So tonight, let's get started. Without much further ado, let's get to it. Segment one, our main gamer experience stories. I'll kick us off. The main game I have been playing has been F1 22 on the PlayStation 5. So I hit a trigger to make sure I'm playing my physical games, and so I pulled out F1 22 for the PlayStation 5, set up the Thrustmaster T300 RS Gran Turismo Edition, and let me tell you, sublime. The mark of a game, or in this case, a series that has woven itself into my DNA, is one that you can take a long layoff from, and after coming back with some minimal amount of dialing in settings and tweaking the configuration, fits like a glove. That's exactly was my experience with F1 22. Apparently, I bought this installment in the series, started my season, and then put the disc in a box. So I picked up with round one, practice session 2 at Bahrain International Circuit. First time out of the paddock, ran into the wall. Second time out of the paddock, spun the car out. On this, there's this really weird crack. I think it's like turn 10 at Bahrain. It's this really weird like crackback turn that's like all off camber, like you come in on a curve, a slight left-hander, but then it's like a straightaway coming off the corner. So it's like the hairiest corner at Bahrain. So I ran the first time out. I ran with the maximum top speed setup. That was what it was on like before I came back. And then so when I came back into practice session 2, I put it on. Well, it was on the increased top speed. I set it to the maximum top speed tunings. And ran that. And then the second time, in practice session 3, I put it on the balance configuration, and I kept it there for qualifying. Wound up getting on pole position, then went on to place second in the race. Got into Leclerc a little bit very early in the race on lap 3. I had a medium race length set, so it was like 15 laps. And they told me, pit boss engineer told me to come in, and I was like, no, I'm not going to pit. I'm going to stay out here. So, and in fact, I wanted to make sure that I had run like about half the race. So I think I was supposed to pit on lap 6, but I held out and pitted on lap 7. I was longer in the pits than planned because I punched my turn in too early. I didn't realize I hadn't played the game in a while. Older versions of Formula 1 didn't have like this turn in, like quick time event that like you hit in the pit. But it does now. I call it quick time event. It's a real time event. It's just like you hit a range gate when you're coming into the pits where you're supposed to hit your X button. So I did that too early because I didn't even know that was in the game or didn't remember. So I got back on the track in 15th, and then when everybody else pitted, I moved up to 10th. And then from there it was just a fight, dog fight for the back half of the race. Got my way back to 4th, and then I looked up. Then I looked up at the listing. I said, "Oh, who's in front of me?" That's Lewis Hamilton. Man. I was like intimidated. I was like every time that AI driver, anytime he's behind me or in front of me, I'm like, crap, man, it's Lewis Hamilton.
Got some driving there to do. Yep.
Yeah. So I outdrove him, got into 3rd, and then I had Sainz in front of me. And I did this. I was watching the replay. I did this like super huge heroic outbraking him into a corner. Came in, and then I couldn't catch Verstappen. Before we went down along the pit wall. So it was a great first outing. This is with the Formula 1. It's been like this for a while in the series, but you play if you choose to, you play the owner driver role, which is really just kind of silly, but it for a video game, it gets to get you to participate in the parts that most players like probably really want to, right? Like being the owner of the team and getting to make all the calls and decisions about how to manage the team. But then
pieces and your car, right? You're not simply just driving.
Yep. So I came back, did the whole management thing. I've talked about the off-season, not the off-season, but the in-between race stuff before. Changing my livery colors based on an unlock that I got. And I took off and headed to round 2 at the Jedi circuit, which I played tonight for about an hour and a half. Then I set the race to long length, and I sat there. And then after I did all the practice sessions and qualifying, I was looking at it, I was like, man, I'm running about a minute 37, minute 38 on my fastest laps. This thing is set for 25 laps. This is going to be a 40-minute race. And the big thing with Formula One, and the thing that's super interesting to me, because I know it translates right to actually driving the cars, is if you bike or you use a spin cycle, one of the things they often talk about is like don't let your mind just go into the zone, right? Don't just let your mind wander off. Like, no, ride the bike like the entire time to actually get the exercise. You don't want to just go into cruise control and not be thinking about working hard and yada yada yada. And that's kind of how I feel like in Formula One, in the F1 game. It's like I drift, I start to think about other stuff, particularly when the races are long. And I think 25 laps, man, I don't know if I could stay focused for that long. But the wheel and pedals are like transformative. Like if I was trying to do that with a controller, my hands would be cramped. Like I'd be in a lot of pain. Part of my hands would be numb, by the later races. But something about the wheel and pedals, first of all, just, allowing you that longer endurance just kind of helps me kind of lock in. And I think maybe just because now in this time, as I've kind of come up with this new paradigm of how I make my playlists and stuff like that, I'm spending a lot more time kind of paying attention to games and trying not to let them be like window dressing and backdrops and things like that. So like I said, ran the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix today, actually won that one. I was on pole, trying to think. I think I was on pole for that race too, but at any rate, Verstappen and Sainz got off ahead of me, and actually, since they're teammates, like I was back behind Sainz, and I was like, man, this guy's going to keep me like blocked off so that Verstappen could pull away. But yeah, it was a great session. Like I said, 25-minute, 40-minute race, awesome time. Has all the drippings and dressings for all the management stuff. So it's a really awesome game.
So when you first said 40 minutes, I was thinking not so much about your mind drift and the focus, but fatigue, right? Because using wheel and pedals for that amount of time, how's that on your, the rest of your body, right? In some ways you're in that position, as you would be trying to stay focused, but keeping your body in a way that you wouldn't normally keep it if you were holding onto a controller or a keyboard.
Yeah, so it's interesting in a couple ways. You with wheel and pedals, like you said, like you're fighting the force feedback like a lot of the way. You go into certain corners, the corners where you're doing really the best, right? Where that you've got a lot of mechanical grip on the car. And when you do, the car's fighting you, right? When the wheel's not fighting you, that means your car has lost grip and you're probably at high risk of spinning out. So, I definitely will get onto some corners where I'm being super aggressive and, have just like apex to turn perfectly. And there's a lot of resistance. And I am, my grip is tighter on the wheel. I'm really kind of muscling the wheel around, right, to get around a corner. I think the other way is, and I hate to admit, there's a reason why Formula One drivers are really fit and have super low body fat. Because, in the chair that I'm sitting in, where I have the wheel and pedals positioned, like the wheel, it's not like in a passenger vehicle, right? Where you kind of have clear clearance, right? From your torso down to the pedals. The pedals are way out in front. The wheel is kind of tucked in closer to you. To get backed off of the wheel, I have to lean my chair back. So, when you're not super skinny, right? Then, you get a little tummy in the way, right, of you in the wheel. So, so that, physical fitness and things like that definitely play into it. But But yeah, it's. I was really surprised. I expected, we've talked about this show before about, exactly, using wheel and pedals, right? Really fatiguing experience. You get tired. Didn't really have that problem today, like really locked it in for the 40 minutes. So it was pretty awesome.
But a really immersive experience as well. I mean, what you're talking about in terms of physically fighting the wheel really does kind of pull you into the game in a way that simply that no amount of rumble and dual sense feedback is going to be able to do.
Yeah, or even the haptics with the PlayStation 5 controller, right? Because I have this game on PlayStation 5, and I've played it with the DualSense, and it's not the same. And I mean, and that's the immersion when you're out on the track by yourself. Like in lots of the segments that I had, when in the Grand Prix of Bahrain, when I came out, when I was in 10th, and I had to fight my way back, from 10th up to 2nd, and today, so today. I'm trying to remember. So today I came into the pit the second time because I was on a two stopper strategy, and I came out like 0.5 seconds in front of Verstappen. Like I went into the pit with like a 15-second lead, and I came out like 0.5 seconds ahead of him. I probably should have gotten a flag with the way I came out on the track, but like so he's behind me. I don't have DRS, right? Because he's the guy behind. So. I'm out in front. I have no hope of getting any advantage of, so I have to use my ERS system, which is the battery power, which is the thing that actually absorbs energy under braking and stores it in a battery and allows you to access that energy when you're out of a corner. So he's behind me 0.5 seconds. And this is, again, this is the immersion, right? It's a really great thing when you've got a wheel and pedals because the other thing is like where your vision is like on a big screen TV. With the wheel and pedals, I'm looking at all things over the HUD. I'm looking at, and I'm more conscious. I've been working on this, but now I'm more conscious about looking when I'm in the lead, looking at the time. Because before, when I didn't have a wheel and pedals or I didn't use wheel and pedals as much, I was really bad about only paying attention to what the cars behind me were doing when I could see them in the rearview mirror. And I drive in cockpit a lot more, right? Because in a lot of games, you can't see the rear view mirror unless you're in the cockpit view. So now, particularly in Formula One, I look at the thing in the upper left-hand corner and I'm watching it and I'm super highly conscious of like, I just lost a half second to that guy. He's now only a second behind. So with a guy like Verstappen behind you, I'm paying attention to that. So I come out ahead of him in 0.5 seconds. I'm like, this guy's super aggressive. I got to get him out to two seconds or more behind me, or anything less than that. I'm at risk at any point of him catching up and overtaking. So, I'm using the ERS system, jamming on it, which, it's a thing you have to be conscious of because you turn that thing on, it doesn't just shut off by itself. So it's pouring extra battery into your powertrain, right? It's pouring extra horsepower into your powertrain. And a lot of times you will be barreling towards a corner. You're thinking about cornering the car and slowing down, and you forget that you've left ERS on. So yeah. And it's a really great point that you bring up. It's just super immersive experience. I mean, for me being a vehicle sim guy, like that's near the epitome. And again, for me, having laid off of the game for a very long time and finally coming back to it, spending a weekend with it, like it's really kind of a defining gaming experience. And I don't mean just F1. I just mean that sentiment of the games that are closest to your heart and truest to you, as you are as a gamer, are the games that you can lay off, come back to them, and within minutes, it's like you're home. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah,
but
I mean, the fact I want to stay here for just 2 more minutes, maybe even the fact that the story you just told, right, and the energy and the emotion in your voice, like it tells a good story in terms of that gameplay experience. Like if this was not just a tight race that you were fighting, this was a race, right? Like you were invested in it. And I guess my question here is, this is the second week in a row that we've had you talk about some wheel and pedals action. Last week was Assetto Corsa. And how does playing them back to back like that, or at least in short succession, the experience that you're describing here with F1 was not the same experience that you were describing last week with Assetto Corsa. So I guess maybe what's the difference? Is it simply just because of the different type of racing, or is it the way that it handles wheel and pedal integration and other types of things?
It's a little all over the place. So I think part of, it's on a curve, right? Because I've been playing Formula One for a very long time. I'm super familiar with the sport. I'm super familiar with the technology, super familiar with the systems. I don't watch it as much anymore like I used to religiously, but I have a paradigm that's in my head from watching it and paying attention to it as much as I have when I'm in driving that vehicle that I don't have when I'm in Assetto Corsa. Assetto Corsa is a lot of unfamiliar ground, and you don't have the fidelity, the granularity of controls that I just talked about, right? Where you're managing the team, you're managing the car, you're putting time into R&D, you are like a race weekend is 3 practice sessions and a qualifying round, and they're 30 to 50 minute practice sessions. I'll also say, I mentioned a little bit last week, tracks that I'm super familiar with, right? Because I've been driving these tracks literally for decades in simulation, right? And there are some that I'm less familiar with. I'm not as familiar. I used to not be. Bahrain, I'm pretty familiar with now. Jeddah, I've become more familiar with, but I mean, you go back a couple of years ago, and I'm like, crap, here's this track, I'm not familiar with it. And it's a city track, which is not my favorite thing. I hate Monaco with a passion. But Bahrain, I've gotten to the point where I've become, very comfortable with it. It's very funny because now I think this season they changed the Saudi Arabia track, and now that you're in Riyadh. So, hats off to F1 24, which I'll probably pick up and get exposed to that new experience. So I think it's just a lot of it's just a matter of comfort, familiarity, just kind of with visibility, in a Formula One car versus a Assetto Corsa where you're constantly in different cars. I think that's a part of it too. In the Assetto Corsa, you're constantly in a different vehicle, so you don't gain this symbiotic relationship, with the simulation where you're, driving your vehicle all the time. So yeah, small reasons for differences, but those differences are there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? The investment and the kind of engagement in that specific vehicle and the handling of it is that you're not necessarily relearning handling every race. You are evolving with it. Yep.
But you have been playing a game that I definitely want to hear about. This is the first of 2 JRPGs we will talk about tonight in a year that is very JRPG heavy, causing some interesting dynamics around the industry because very, very funny. Most of the most acute things that people are discussing seem to always be anchored around JRPGs in our favorite Square Enix. But you've been playing a different one, and you've been playing it on Xbox, which is where people should be playing a lot of JRPGs.
Yeah, so I talked about this a little bit last week. This launched last week. It launched on Game Pass. This is Eiyuden Chronicles, 100 Heroes. This was the Kickstarter game from the developer, designer of Suikoden 1 and 2 and Rabbit and Bear Studios. So as I talked about it last week, I was just not very far in at all. I'm still only, a couple, maybe half dozen hours in at this point, but it is the opposite of what you were talking about in terms of wanting that immersion and that engagement experience. I needed something to just kind of zone out with this week and found myself spending a lot more time here than I had planned to last week on the show. So at this point, you've, a couple hours in, you've kind of gone through the initial hour-long kind of standard JRPG, intro mission tutorial kind of narrative setup, but you're only kind of peeling back some layers. You start to see some of the potential conflicts within the Empire and the Kingdom factions and the Watch, kind of a group of not necessarily mercenaries, but also kind of protectors to some degree. You are going out, you can recruit others, and as you recruit them, you get little story beats, and it also, they fit within different kind of class types or archetypes within role-playing aspects. So I've got, you get your brawler and your range and your cleric and monk and white magic and dark magic, and all kind of not necessarily straight up kind of carbon copies, but definitely, they're blending those themes to give you uh, different characters. And even some of those characters kind of subvert some tropes, even as they lean into them in terms of kind of anime and characterizations. Some of them definitely lean into it. And I think the challenge, I shouldn't say that. The challenge so far is knowing that there's, 100 characters, and really feeling like, how much do I invest in, how much do I spend my money to upgrade this person? Because are they going to be with me for most of my time? Or am I going to, as soon as I find another character, am I going to, pitch this person? But at the same time, it's been a lot of fun, kind of been doing a lot of kind of grinding, going out, advancing the story somewhat, but just kind of exploring the landscape. And it is, like I said last week, it is definitely in that late 90s kind of PlayStation 1 era design. Just wandering around an overworld and random battles, and finding, you know, figuring out in the pre-rendered backgrounds of where to maneuver through. So, but it also has been a lot of fun in just the as I'm playing and going through the turn-based battles, you can really just shut off your mind if you want to and turn them on automatic, or if you want to, which feels, I guess, simple. If you're trying to if you have some simple enemies that you're going to blow through, it speeds up the menus because the menus aren't always super quick. But if you do want to take time to go in, and you can pair up different, you improve your relationships with different people, you can pair them up and they'll have like a combo attack, which then jumps ahead in the turn order, or doesn't necessarily, it allows someone to get an attack, but then the other character could also be a block or use an item. So there's some potential there. Yeah, it's been within kind of the battle grid. You've got frontline and backline. You've got both for your party and also for enemies. So depending on how your character or one of your characters in your party attacked, they might not be able to get to enemies on the back line. They can only melee up on the front line. And so then you have to kind of pick and choose who you're doing it, or different attacks that bring the other enemy up toward the front line so that they can be attacked by all your characters. Yeah, I mean, it's enjoyable because it plays on the themes that people have people are familiar with, right? At this point, it's not doing anything drastically different. It is just a new one of something that I've played in a variety of settings over many decades. But at the same time, I'm feeling now like I kind of want to figure out, I need to get Game Pass on my Steam Deck in order to kind of sit curled up in a chair and grind away some levels. But this was definitely the busy week of work and a lot of other stuff going on, that it was easy to just kind of relax and feel a sense of accomplishment, even when you're feeling in your regular life that things are just spinning. So it was nice to have a little bit of JRPG grindiness in that sense.
So now, did you play Fell Seal Arbiter's Mark?
Ooh, no, nope.
Okay,
No.
I'm trying to reach for a game that where I'm hearing elements of kind of what the tactical, because this is turn based. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a turn-based game. I mean, tactical wise, it's not super tactical. I wouldn't really call it tactical, to the same way that, like, it's not their tactics in terms of, well, I could see that you could play it tactical. Let's say that, right? Because almost there is almost not necessarily a gambit system, but something similar to the gambit system from Final Fantasy 12, where you can set your characters to react in certain ways that give them certain thresholds of do I heal at a certain time? Do I go through, do I use magic or a physical attack? Does it depend on the health of the enemy, or does it depend on the health of another character? So there is a little bit of those, like you can go in and monkey with that. You can also kind of just brute force your way through because it is grindy. But I think at some point having those tactics is where the auto really comes into play. That if you are trying to just go out and grind and you do need to go out and grind, then having those tactics set up allows you to kind of speed through that in a faster fashion. I think one of the things that I haven't seen yet in the menus that things like Bravely Default, I think Octopath Traveler did this as well, as where you could turn up the enemy rate encounter, where if you know that you need to, grind up some levels in order to get to a spot where you can take on or feel comfortable taking on the boss, that you can kind of give yourself a higher encounter rate in order to not necessarily run around in circles. I have not run around in circles. I've enjoyed kind of exploring the landscape and that piece of it. So yeah, so no, I think that's where, like, it's tactical if you want it, but it is not necessarily the core loop of that gameplay.
But sorry, is one of the key elements, like it sounded like one of the key elements you mentioned was character positioning, which makes it sound like it has a hex or a grid play system and you maneuver characters around, kind of the chess piece kind of aspect of it.
It does not. It is simply it's on kind of a slightly isometric, like it's at an angle. The second row of the enemies is in the far upper left, and your back row of characters is in the bottom right. But it is a very, for all sense and purposes, it's a flat plane, and you are not moving once you go into a battle. Like in the menu system, as you're out and you're in your party, before you get into a battle, you can move people around. You can position them 3 spots in the front row, 3 spots in the back. You could have a support character as well. So you can position some of those, but it's not, once the battle's set or once the battle starts, you're going with there. So there's not that kind of active tactical kind of strategy. There is very little strategy that is, it is there in terms of the setup, but in the actual battle, there's not there's strategy in terms of the traditional JRPG strategy of finding elemental weaknesses or those types of things, but not necessarily in terms of the elevation or positioning or that type of Fire Emblem or tile base type of tactics.
Okay, gotcha.
So, and I'll catch Wara's comment here in terms of Wara, I did not talk about Zao yet, and unfortunately I had not had the chance to go back and keep diving into it. So I'd be curious to hear if you did, but no, I have not had a chance to dive back into it any further, but hopefully. I know that I will. I know, as I talked about last week, I definitely enjoyed it. I think this is where I anticipated that I would. But as I said earlier, I needed something that kind of just allowed me to zone out at the end of a long day, and a JRPG filled that niche for me this week.
So I guess my last question: are character classes like designated? I guess a thing that I've been noticing in a lot of RPGs is that it's more about like the aspect of like a given build or even, in some JRPGs, there's a lot of kind of auto leveling where like you level up and you become like more powerful, but like you're not picking and choosing, what you want to designate to improve in.
I think that is usually the tradition, is that you are just simply leveling up stats. I think if a game says that it has a class-based system, Then, I mean, when you get into things like Final Fantasy Tactics or Tactics Ogre or some of the other, there's a variety of other ones where you do have the ability to change classes as you level. Like Bravely Default is definitely factored around this, that you are moving classes and each class comes with different abilities, and in some ways you want to hit certain level thresholds within a couple different classes, because then you learn a certain skill and that skill can come with you as you move into another class. But there are also times where character is tied to class, so that a character is this type of class of a character, and that is by having them in their party, you are then having that class rather than having a set of 4 or 5 people and you can make them fluid between classes. That it also is, it's the difference of, in this case, you have 90 some different characters. And so each of them have a different potential class or a little shift in that. So then you are choosing those characters based on the kind of tactical strategy types of setups that you may want or are playing to your play style.
Very cool. Very cool. You ready to head over and talk some news?
Let's talk some news.
All right, let's do it. Going on to segment 2, our main news headlines. First story up, Ubisoft's free-to-play first-person shooter XDefiant finally gets release date, and it's this month. This news story over on Game Informer. XDefiant, over on Game Informer by Wesley LeBlanc. XDefiant, the free-to-play first-person shooter starring factions from Ubisoft's catalog of franchises, finally has a release date, and it's out very soon. Ubisoft announced today that XDefiant drops onto PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC via Ubisoft Connect on May 21st. This is the first day the XDefiant preseason will begin. I think that's a typo. Giving players a chance to enjoy the shooter before its official first season begins. This release date reveal follows various betas and tests for the game, which at one point resulted in the game getting indefinitely delayed this year. So the neat thing about the preseason format, Call of Duty kind of does this too, where the game launches. Now, of course, with Call of Duty, that's mostly because it has a single-player campaign, and I think there's an effort to maybe give people some time to get through the single-player campaign component. But plenty of people skip the campaign and jump straight into multiplayer, and when you do that, it kind of gives you a few weeks, like usually I think they do like 6 weeks. So it gives you some time to kind of grind before the formal season 1 starts. And so what a lot of people will do is they will get through the military ranks and get to their first prestige level. So it sounds a little bit like XDefiant is doing that too. Unfortunately, Talmaster could not be here with us tonight. Actually, it's kind of funny. XDefiant is doing the exact same thing. Preseason will last 6 weeks before going into our seasonal cadence. So unfortunately, Talmaster couldn't be here tonight. This is a game he has been tracking, although here now in the end game, I am also starting to pick up and track it because I'm a big Call of Duty player, and now I have to, pay attention to one of the things that supposedly will be one of its first key competitors. I think one of the big differences is I think this game doesn't have skill-based matchmaking, I think. So it's launching with, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 maps, which is a very healthy, robust amount. 5 different modes, including Domination, Hotshot, Occupy, Escort, and Zone Control, which I haven't played the betas and stuff, so I'm not as familiar with the game itself. I'm hoping that maybe Hotshot is like just a standard TDM type of mode. I don't see just like a straight up like free-for-all, so that may be a thing. So it'll be interesting to see how it turns out. I will probably... DBQ, do you know, is this a free-to-play game?
Yeah, this is a free-to-play game. That is the model for it. Yeah, I would guess that Hotshot's got to be... yeah, because otherwise everything else like Occupy, Escort, Domination, definitely feel like you're moving. I mean, they tip their hand at where they're at. Yeah, this is Mark Rubin, right, from former Infinity Ward.
Yeah, former Call of Duty dude.
Yep. So, and it was already supposed to. Oh, Hotshots Headshots? Thanks, Warwar. I don't know. I don't remember if Tao was in one of the alphas or the betas, but I know that he had been tracking it as well. So, be interesting to see if this comes at a time where it can find an audience. Like originally, it was supposed to launch last fall, which seems like it would have been easy for it to get lost in. That launching kind of in the right at the start of summer as people are looking for something to maybe as people may be looking for a free to play game to sink a lot of time in. Yeah, it would be interesting to see if this finds an audience.
So it is. Hey Google, what's the date for Memorial Day?
In the United States of America, Memorial Day will be on Monday, May 27th.
Yep.
Okay, so
It's the week before, right?
yeah, yep. Hold on just a second. The assistant is still listening. Oh, okay,
there we
she's
go.
done.
Well,
So
thanks for calling out in the chat kind of the breakdown here of the different the modes in terms of what they do.
okay. Picking up bounties. Yeah, so, I mean, for me, it's going to come down to, first of all, am I going to make the time for it, right? The big thing is, like you said, it's barreling towards a Memorial Day weekend. What is a typical thing that we expect Activision to do when this game launches? Double XP weekend.
Double XP, yep. Maybe even free multiplayer, right? They're going to...
They will do a double
program
XP free week. Yeah, and I forget what launched... was it? Man, I can't remember what it was. Something launched last fall, and they heavily did counter programming. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was kind of funny. But yeah, I mean that's the problem, right? Now you put people in the position of, am I going to back off? And I don't know where. Let's see. So season 3 Reloaded just dropped. I think I was playing today, so I think, or last night, so I think, I was playing today. So I think there's 23, there's about 3 more weeks plus. So amazingly right on time. So guess what's going to be happening when this game launches? Season 4 will be getting dropped, and it's going to be super interesting. Another game that comes out shortly after this, I talked about it on Tag, talking about games, tail end of last week. Star Wars Hunters is going to be coming out the first week of June. That doesn't impact a lot of the same people, but you have a crowd of people who play the mobile version of Warzone, and now that version and Call of Duty are now in sync. And you have people on Nintendo Switch who, I put these stats up a couple of weeks ago, 60% of Nintendo Switch owners also own an Xbox Series X or PlayStation 5. So you've got some crossover there. So it's just going to be interesting, kind of see how it goes. I mean, when I talked about Star Wars Hunters, I talked about how this beginning of, tail end of the school year, beginning of the summer, all the kids, it's going to be a very competitive time, right? With games that are coming out, again, as I always refer to in the attention-based economy that we're in. Summer Game Fest is going to be going down then, and the word I'm hearing about the Xbox plan, it may not kick off in June, but I've referred on more than one occasion to these 10 games that Xbox is supposed to release this year, and they haven't released but one. And that's going to be Senua's Sacrifice. There's not a lot of crossover there with like this type of game, or quite frankly, just a lot of other games. But the word is that, whether intentionally or due to just game slipping, they've kind of saved up all their salvos, and they're going to release them one per month on the walk up to Indiana Jones. So now you're going to have a ton of Xbox games that are going to be vying for people's attention as well. So, it's going to be a busy summer. So it'll be interesting. Are we ready to go on to story number 2?
Yeah, let's Oh, yes. I want to see which one of us steps on the grumpy old man soapbox first on this one. So,
So story number 2, the UK government responds to petition asking them to regulate publishers into keeping games in a working state. The story over on Rock, Paper, Shotgun. Let's see.
this is related to the crew
Yep.
shutting down, and the petition here of having the government take responsibility of keeping games up in a playable state, I believe, from what I was reading.
So the story, like I said, over on Rock, Paper, Shotgun by Graham Smith. The UK government has responded to a petition asking for government interventions to force the industry to keep video games in a reasonably working state when support ends, rather than allowing them to become unplayable, such as when online servers are shut down. The petition was prompted by the closure in March of 10-year-old Ubisoft racing game, The Crew, as DBQ mentioned. The response was, and I quote, "Consumers should be aware that there is no requirement in UK law compelling software companies and providers to support older versions of their operating systems, software, or connected products. There may be occasions where the companies make commercial decisions based on the high running costs of maintaining older servers for video games that have declining user bases," says the government's response. However, video game sellers must comply with existing consumer law, including the Consumer Rights Act of 2015, the CRA, and the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008, CPR. So DBQ, I will let you take it away and see if you are the first one to tell people to get off your lawn.
I mean, I think so I will say that as someone who appreciates gaming history and preservation, that I completely value and oftentimes seek out physical copies of things so that I have the ability to go back to it. As I'm staring across at a stack of games from multiple different generations ago, that there is value in having something preserved so that it can be experienced, that people can go back to it. That said, from the get-go, this game was an online-only game. And the fact that it was an online-only game that launched 10 years ago. So I think that this is not something where it is, it is a NBA 2K where you can no longer play your character once servers go down, or you can't get into even other modes that are not necessarily online based because the servers have gone down. This is something this was an online only game. And so it feels a little tough to stand up and fight for the preservation of something that from the beginning we knew was an online only game. I think the challenge is that there's not the way the infrastructure is within the Crew game or within some other Ubisoft games. This is not something that somebody can go off and run a private server of and keep a game, right? City of Heroes, that there's the MMO, role superhero game. Somebody still got there's 2 private servers still going for it, right? Like there are ways that you can preserve, but this game did not set up something like that. And so I think this is the conflict that I have with it. I see the value in it. I also think that this was what they communicated when they sold you the license to use this product.
So I'm checking time because we've got quite a number of issues to get into on this topic. So first thing I'll mention is the resolution of this issue from the UK's decision is that the UK government petition will remain open until October 16th. And if it reaches 100,000 signatures, it will be considered for debate in Parliament. To get 100,000 signatures, and we will punch you into yet another channel of bureaucracy and continue the fight. So I say that snarkily, but yeah, I mean, it's better than nothing, right? I mean, because the way I read the opening statement, it was just kind of like, hey, maybe there's something here. Thanks for asking us for legal counsel. Please feel free to file your own class action lawsuit, which it sounds like is the way, it's going to go. which, the gamers lawsuit, last year trying to take on the Activision Microsoft merger. I mean, with all these things like signing a petition doesn't get you anywhere. It just sends an initial signal, and then from there you have to follow due process and come up with stuff. The first thing I want to address is you mentioned online only, and this is a particular nit with Ubisoft games. I think a lot of people misunderstand when that label is applied. When we talk about an MMO, it's quite clear that, like, obviously if the servers go down, you're not going to have access to the game, right? But where people get themselves caught up a little bit is maybe not understanding what a company says when they say online only. And if you've played a lot of Ubisoft games, this is a thing that happens. For instance, The Division 2, largely predominantly a single player game. Tier 2 functionality is co-op, which, doesn't even, like, in terms of just the technical art of the possible, shouldn't even necessarily require a server, could be done by peer-to-peer, right, connections.
Yep.
And then there's, of course, full-blown multiplayer, and The Division 2 has that component to it. But most of the time you spend in Division 2, most people, is just in single-player mode. Now, again, this is an Ubisoft game under observation. If you're familiar with The Division 2, you will know, if the servers aren't down, you can't play the game. You must connect to the server. Like, sometimes, like, there's all this sturm and drang about what's the Ubisoft game that's coming out that people are all, like, wrapped around the axle about because
the Star Wars game?
Star Wars Outlaws requires you to connect when you first install the game, right? We have had phone home implementations for like 2 decades, right? I mean, that is essentially what Steam implemented and required at its inception. Again, this is not me saying that you should co-sign it and go along with it. This is just me talking about, what the history is. But an online-only game, when that term is, like, sometimes it's just you have to do a check-in, but a lot of times there's server-side lift and there's some functionality. The Division 2, there's a stateful representation of your game's state and status and your character, and when you boot up and log in, it lives on the server. And yes, you may have a local copy, but part of the thing it's doing is it's doing that ACNAC back and forth, right, to revise and ensure that you have the right status. And the world, right, that the state of the world that you left it in your instance, right, is part of what's part of that record. Because part of that sometimes gets carried along into co-op and multiplayer, and it's used to synchronize, right, with other people because they don't have a local copy of you and your state and yada, yada, yada. So there are more and more games like that exist. And so it's something to be conscious of as a consumer when you go to buy a game, right? To understand, like, it wasn't necessarily shocking to me, but it was definitely bothersome and annoying to hit the realization. And admittedly, I should have known because I'm very familiar with these things, but I just didn't read the box label in particular with respect to The Division 2, which is a game that I love. I didn't relate that state of being to that game. I'm definitely aware of that now, right? And that's very often the case with Ubisoft games, that they have to do that check-in and sync and back and forth, character, state world, record, etc. So it sounds like, and I didn't play The Crew, but it sounds like The Crew is that same type of game, right?
I believe so, yes. I mean, it is there, at least, it's been a long time since I've even dabbled in The Crew. I have more familiarity with The Crew 2, but the setup basically is that you are not always running against live people, right? There is some of that. I do think, like, your piece here is interesting when it shifts from a game where there is a strong multiplayer component to something where, whether it's Avatar Frontiers of Pandora or the Far Cry series or the upcoming Star Wars Outlaw, like, if those servers, if it's no longer doing that check-in 10 years from now, does that mean that, experiencing Far Cry 5 or 6 is not going to be possible because of that lack of an internet connection or the lack of a server there to ping back and to say, yes, it's verified?
That's what I would definitely expect of any Ubisoft game. Like today, if you're going to go buy an Ubisoft game, the thing that I would assume is that 10 years from now, when the servers go down, like that game's not going to be playable. Now, here's where another thing gets people twisted, and I'm glad you said that the reason you buy physical is so that you can go back to a game in this day and age. That is still probably going to wind up being potentially problematic, because even the physical copies, they do a local install and then they do the same thing. They go up to the cloud, they go to the data center, blah, 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 blah.
Well, even if I could still download it, even if I had the physical copy, if it can't connect to a server, it doesn't do me any good.
Right. So here's the thing, and plenty of people are going to get angry. Again, this is not me saying that this is the way it should be. I'm telling you this is the way it is. Software is not property. As much as you think it is not. And when I say it's not property, I don't mean in the realm of like what's right with consumer advocacy and blah, blah. I'm talking about you go back to the origins of legality and judicial systems, and you look at like old world writings of what constitutes property and what constitutes ownership. And that is not the same legal veil and framework that exists for software. One of the principal tenets of property and ownership is that it is a thing that once given unto possession by an individual cannot be transformed or changed outside of that owner's permission. And it is a thing where another third party, another entity cannot tell or inform or alter how you're able to use that thing. That is, again, you go back to 1500s, right? These are the things that were in writing in legal documents and which continue to be passed down in the legal systems today. None of that defines software. So when you talk about property, right, and the way the legal systems viewed them, you talk about a piece of land or a building, guess what? When you sign a deed, or you close on a piece of land, you're not handed a EULA, right? So that EULA is what defines your ability to utilize the software. Again, I'm not talking about ways a thing should be. I'm talking about the ways things are that people should know. And if you go back, the principal things that I keep trying to make sure people understand about a EULA and about software, and look at what the UK said, right? There is no law that compels, right, a publishing entity to do certain things. You look at a EULA, and one of the shocking things that people will realize is there are things that are written in there that say that the publisher has no legal liability for the software to even work. And when you talk about warranty, there is no such thing as a warranty for software. So again, there's these are the things that kind of get caught up, right, in people's understanding. And I definitely don't think it's right that, like, I'll admit, I love Ubisoft games. I love me some The Division, some Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, right? And as I'm spending $70 on these games, the realization and the understanding is, there's probably a point where before Windows has obsoleted the game or something else has happened that should make the game unplayable, there's the potential that that game will be unplayable simply because Ubisoft doesn't have the infrastructure and isn't maintaining it and doesn't have the telemetry on the other side to enable that game to work. So it's a super interesting thing. I think the last thing I want to kind of pull the thread on with you is, I gave Todd Howard, Bethesda, Xbox, a lot of problems with what they did with Starfield, because they said that the reason the game ran at 4K 30 on the Xbox, part of the reason for it was, in addition for graphical fidelity, but a lot of the causality that people linked to it was, well, because it needs to track particles, on the other side of the galaxy and everything, or in the universe, whether you see them or not. And that means that the 55,000 sandwiches that you made on some ship that are never visible, that they're still being tracked, right, somewhere in memory and compute. And what I said was, like, look at Star Citizen. And again, that's a PC-only game, but Star Citizen's technical approach to solving its problem was for there to be server-side lift, right? For it to do processing of particles. That's why in Star Citizen, you can go to a planet and there could be snow on the entire planet as a biodome, and that does not impact your performance on PC. So there are things, and that's an extreme case, but there are other cases where you can have server-side lift and you can handle some of the compute that happens in a video game. And I said, If that was the Starfield problem, they should have done server-side lift, right? Right, wrong, or indifferent, part of the reality now is because they pushed for Starfield to run entirely in an on-prem configuration, 10 years from now, let's say Xbox goes down, yeah, there's the licensing thing of the little bitty ACNAC thing of you handshake, right? But in general, they built the game so that it will run locally on one piece of hardware. And that's counter to kind of what the Ubisoft paradigm that, like I said, I think pervades now to all of their games. So should somebody feel that they have greater assurances in buying an Xbox game than an Ubisoft game from the publisher as a provider perspective?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting comparison there with Starfield. I completely agree with you on the consumer end of it. I think the piece where it is maybe disappointing is from the preservation aspect, right? Like, as a consumer, there should be no expectation that this is a license, and that has been made more and more abundantly clear and that was, as people who have grown through the digital conversion of the industry, right? Like, that was all part of, there were those arguments of what happens. What can I do? But there, even if there's not the ability for individuals to play it, there, without some type of, how is there value in having something that allows that game to be preserved, like the Video Game History Museum? Like, is there a space, working the work that the Video Game History does with Internet Archive, and are there other places? Are there places that things can be preserved so that they could be experienced, but maybe not in the? I think this is the challenge of preserving games more than any other type of creative expression, is that the way, the platform that they are produced on is transitory. That preserving cinema history is more of a matter of making sure that you convert and make sure and you restore and find old cellophane, rolls that are starting to deteriorate. But it is not necessarily that it needs, there are processes there. And so I guess that's, from a preservation piece, that is still, I think, an aspect that we have not, the industry itself has not really addressed. And whether it ever will, and I guess, and whether it ever, I would say that it should, but whether the industry itself feels that it should, it really will depend on, right? Like, the difference between creative expression and revenue generating, I think is part in there as well.
Well, and another root cause to it, and this is something that's very near and dear to your heart, is what got us here in the first place. A large part of what got us here in the first place was copyright law, which we should all know by this point is an incredibly broken thing in terms of its implementation frameworks in most, right, speaking countries, right? Yeah. And the problem is copyright law, which was originally made to protect writers, authors, has been contorted to now it is a thing that is weaponized to protect publishers. And that's part of the problem that's around this video game thing. What I would like to see, unfortunately, what I like to see is it should be pretty simple. In all our minds, this should be an incredibly simple thing. It should be an incredibly simple thing for a parliament or a Congress or somebody, or the Supreme Court, whatever, to simply say, hey, at the point where you abandon the game and you are no longer publishing it, you are no longer collecting revenue from it, the game, you still own the IP. There's nothing that prevents you from going and making another game. There's nothing that prevents you from bringing a lawsuit against other people making a new game off of your IP. However, that game, that instance, that CSCI,
right, treated like public domain.
Yeah, you abandon it. Everybody on the planet has a right to go off and stand up a server. They don't have to do it with any technical support from you guys. Although I would say maybe that law should also require them to make public technical information of a non-proprietary nature. But there should be a law that allows people to go off and maintain it, right? To set up a server, to allow people to do a check-in just to get a heartbeat and allow them to play the game. The problem is that for that law to come about, there are going to have to be some super deep discussions on copyright law, because that's the law, the big legal framework that it steps and trades across.
Yeah, it really does.
So let's go on to story number 3. You have one from one of our favorite companies who's often caught up in these kerfuffles of copyright and people doing things with their games. Take-Two.
Yeah, it's true. But this one is not a copyright one. So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Take-Two laying off, I think it was about 5% of their workforce. And it has come out, not necessarily confirmed yet, but it seems to be hitting on a number of places. Bloomberg, it hit on Polygon, Game Industry, it hit a number of other places as well, all related to some of the places that are feeling the layoffs, which result in some shutdowns, are Roll7, which is the Ali developer. Ali World, a game I really loved. Roller Dome came out shortly thereafter, Ali World, and that is planning for closure. And then also closing Intercept Games, which is known for, it's the studio that was developed Kerbal Space Program 2. So not the original studio, but when the IP was bought, and that as well. So some closures there of two kind of mid-tier profile game IPs with Ali and Kerbal Space Program. So I guess that is there again, not a lot here other than an announcement, or at least kind of the assumption based on what has been coming out. Nothing about where they're going next, or what's happening, if there was anything in development. And so that is the aspect there, that they were the Intercept Games was planning on they were working with Weta Workshop Games for a Tales of the Shire, which was supposed to be coming later in 2024, potentially 2025, but that is kind of what the news story here is.
So I haven't really climbed in the ring on this topic of Take-Two shutting down Roll7, but 2022, I did spend a whole year in discussion with you guys talking about Ali World, because I played it on, I think I played it on every platform it became available on. So
I think you did. You played it on quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So I quadruple dipped.
Yeah, and it was in my most fun superlatives of the year. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Simply because I love the game and I wanted to support the developers. So, man, it's a shame, taking them, to kind of, taking them off the board like that. So I don't really, I don't have any more detail that I can really express about that. I was so invested in that game. Yeah.
I mean, I the hope here is, I think that, and this is not new, right? We've been talking about this with other layoffs, is in previous iterations of the industry and the marketplace, that people would go on and relaunch an independent studio, but finding investors at this point, finding revenue, finding investment money is a lot harder to come by than it was. And so it makes the future a little more precarious than it would have been a few years ago.
Yeah. So let's go on to story number 4. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth sales are fine, but it's no Dragon's Dogma 2. So this news story over at IGN, I keep having to zoom here, by Rebecca Valentine. It's natural that everyone's been a little antsy about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth lately. For weeks, analysts and fans have been discussing the game's potential underperformance compared to its predecessor Remake, amid worries this might impact the future of the 7 Remake trilogy. Today, we got a little more data on what's really going on here, though the jury is still out how publisher Square Enix is looking at the numbers. Today, NPD published its monthly video game consumer spending report for March, which offers insight on the U.S. market calculated by dollar sales. One of the more notable games in the rankings this month was Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which reports have suggested isn't selling as well as Square Enix would like, despite critical acclaim. Without actual sales figures, it's difficult to tell, and our analysis a few weeks ago indicated that it's doing fine, just not gangbusters. I would also say not just because of not having sales numbers, but also because of Square Enix having made no statement about their feelings about Final Fantasy VII Remake. Everything that has been discussed in the last month is all entirely speculation. So, and it is often speculation with no regard or comparison for what the market is now versus 2020. Fortunately, before I got angry, I was listening to What's Good Games today, and Miss Andrea Renee and Brittany Baumbracher. Andrea finally, after they went on about this topic for a while, finally got to the point where she said, what I typically say within the first 5 seconds of this conversation, which is that, in 2020, 2 games came out that performed incredibly well. One of those was, I keep wanting to say, Animal Planet, because I don't play it. It's on Nintendo Switch. What is the thing called again?
Animal Crossing.
Animal Crossing. Yep. So Animal Crossing, and then Final Fantasy VII Remake. Why? Because Animal Crossing literally dropped as the world was going into lockdown over the COVID-19 pandemic. And Final Fantasy VII came out 2 weeks or so later. People were locked in their homes. They weren't able to do anything.
Wait.
Yeah.
The remake?
Yes.
Came out. Did it really?
April of 2020.
I'm wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. So, look, not only so, and they had a couple conversations about like the economy, which is, in my opinion, not accurate because inflation now is like a third of what it was like 2 years ago. Like people, different stratifications of socioeconomic status. There's a line above which people are doing incredibly well today. And there are some pockets of people that are not doing great. But the real point is that there were tons of people, particularly the people with high disposable incomes, who suddenly had no logistics money that they had to spend. We did not have to pay for gas. We did not have to pay for vehicle maintenance. People took car insurance and dropped it down to the absolute minimum that was there were tons of things going on that yielded greater disposable cash to people.
And significant disposable time, right? I think you're absolutely right. Like the investment here, the marketplace is different. The culture is different.
Right. So at any rate, that's, I'm going to try and do something here. I always have a problem with share screen. Matt Piscatella. Share. Let's see how this works. Okay. Look, it came up. So Matt Piscatella provided his numbers for March, not his numbers, I'm sorry, NPD numbers for March of this year. Those are the top level numbers. I want to try and get down to the big major thing, which is, of course, now I don't know.
I'm pretty sure anybody watching this is
not able to see that. Yeah, I may not be able to see. For some reason, the JPEG is working completely differently than
Dragon's Dogma. I can make out that at top.
Yeah. So the list rundown is Dragon's Dogma 2 was number 1, Helldivers 2 was number 2, and this is the, just double checking. This is the overall. Yeah, this is top 20 best-selling premium games. So Dragon's Dogma 2, Helldivers 2, MLB The Show, which is a multi-platform title, Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 3. I'm going to have to bring this down to my screen where I can see it better. Sorry. That is not working.
As you do that, I will mention, I intentionally did not put the Helldivers story this week on our news because I kind of want to let the dust settle to see what the actual ramifications are. Right, the news around Helldivers this week was the PlayStation verification, the PlayStation account if you're a PC player, which then led to as we have seen, for better, worse, and worse and worse, more review bombing and response by the developer. But it's still kind of a story in motion, and so we'll see kind of how that plays out over the next, even potentially a couple of days if there's changes there.
Yeah, definitely need time to marinate. So again, I'll just run down the list again. Dragon's Dogma 2, Helldivers 2, MLB The Show, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, Rise of the Ronin was 5th. Princess Peach was 6th, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was 7th, Unicorn Overlord 8th, and WWE 2K24 was 9th. Just a few things that I want to bring up. I think lots of people are getting vastly wrong. first of all, when you look at this list and you go down the entire 20, there are 7 games in this top 20 list that are exclusives. So I am not sure where people have gotten to the point that in a 50-year history of an industry where we have applauded exclusives, in the last 90 days, suddenly people don't like exclusives. And I don't quite understand it. I, as a software engineer, fully believe in the fact, whether you like it or not, that if I take any development team and I give them one hardware target, 9 times out of 10, that development team will create a better creative work, software application, business application, whatever, than if I take the exact same team and put them in a situation where I tell them they have 5 different targets. It's just a matter of time, schedule, complexity, resources, etc. If all things between hardware are equal, and there are markets like that exist, we call them commodities. The only reason you buy one farmer's pork bellies instead of another farmer's pork bellies is because there's a difference in cost. And when there's nothing but a difference in cost, then people start driving down to the lowest common denominator, and there's no real way to differentiate. The way hardware manufacturers do differentiate today is they differentiate by access to software, which has been the thing for, a 40-year history. At any rate, my point is that while I can accept that there may be people who dislike exclusives and maybe people think that there's some problem associated with them that I think people are largely making up, the point is on this list, there are 7 games that are exclusives. So, you could say that something is underselling or not performing well. However, against the rest of the market, it's clear that it's a manner and a way in which to compete and take advantage and come out with better outcomes than some other games. Rise of the Ronin is yet another game that people have talked about not performing well, and yet here it is at number 5 on the list. Princess Peach in at number 6, and again, this is a game, and Nintendo does this all that. This is a game that is selling on one platform and is outperforming Madden NFL 24. Right? So, feel however, you want to feel about a thing, but here are the numbers. The things in here that I like, Dragon's Dogma 2 coming in at number 1. You can feel however you want to feel about Dragon's Dogma 2, but the game clearly came out in a rush so that Capcom could get the game out before their fiscal year ended. That's a thing. MLB The Show 24, great. That's a game that I buy every year. Great that it's multi-platform, and that allows it to now be, as high on the scale. Unicorn Overlord, I talked about this being the year of the JRPG, so good to see it up there as well. I don't know if anything else sticks out to me as like a darling that I personally like being in the top 20. Any comments from you, DBQ?
No, I think the interesting, and I don't remember what February's numbers were, right? Because Rebirth launched at the end of February. And so you're getting March numbers are really kind of after the fact. Dragon's Dogma definitely had some hype around it. I think Princess Peach, I think is an example of just the sheer volume of Nintendo consoles out there to hit that, spec. Yeah, I don't know that there was anything that really, I think the fact that Helldivers kind of almost 3 months in, because Helldivers was it a January or was it an early February game?
I think it was February because Pal World was January, right? And then right, I think Helldivers 2 was Feb.
Came right after that. Yep. So the fact that it's still going strong at another second month in is a good sign for its longevity. I think the interesting piece there with Helldivers is the price point of at $40 versus $70, and what that does for game sales as well.
Yep. So I'm going to do a quick reshuffle, DBQ. Because of time, I'm going to skip the last news story about the Xbox Showcase. I'm sure we're going to have an opportunity to come back and talk about the Xbox Showcases.
We'll talk about it when it happens. Yep.
I've got to step away for a second, so I am going to actually let you start us off with segment 3, talking about the games that you've been playing, and then I will be back as soon as I can.
No problem. So segment 3 here, this is where we run down anything else that has taken up our gaming time over the course of this week. And for me, as I said, it was a busy week, but also I found myself kind of pulled back into Star Wars for the first time in a while. And maybe it is I think actually it is the 25th release of the Phantom Menace, May the 4th, right? Yesterday. I appreciate it. I have taken advantage of many of Star Wars sales over the years in terms of my Steam library is pretty full of Star Wars games. So I took a chance over the weekend to kind of go back through and play kind of dabble in kind of a few different Star Wars games. And because of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, having its 25th anniversary, I went back and played both the PlayStation 1 Phantom Menace video game, which is like the movie adaptation, and the N64 Star Wars Racer. So the pod racing game out on N64. These were the two games that launched or that came out around the Phantom Menace back in 1999. I can remember walking through a Best Buy that year and seeing a giant wall of TVs all synced up together to play some pod racer. And I'll say that for as simplistic as pod racer is, it for that period of time, it holds up okay. And the Aspire one is the kind of remastered or re-released one by Aspire. It's out on basically any console. I bought it for $1.30 on Steam to play on the Steam Deck, but also had it on Xbox through Xbox Gold at some point in time that it was a monthly one. That the sometimes games don't age very well, and the Phantom Menace video game in that kind of overhead early polygonal 3D flat pixel or flat shaders and textures really is tough to go back to on a modern screen and a modern console. So yes, but I again, it's a nice little nostalgia trip as someone who can remember paging through a copy of EGM with the Phantom Menace on the cover during college years, and having a chance to go back and play some of these games. I also picked around and poked at the PC, the Steam version of Disney Infinity, which it just gives you kind of all your characters, and all the boxes are all kind of there, or at least the characters and the play sets are all there. So Disney Infinity 3 had Star Wars in it as well. And then I also picked up the Jedi Fallen Order, which was like $4 this weekend to play on the Steam Deck. And I played it when it first came out. Got to kind of Kashyyyk and kind of fell off it. I went back to it. Maybe I've played through that opening scrapyard level at least 4 times at this point on various different platforms, on PlayStation and Xbox and PC. And I think, yes, and that is absolutely correct that I've played it on EA Play at first, then on Xbox when it came to Game Pass or EA Play there. Then at one point it was a PlayStation Plus game and had some haptic feedback in it built into it. And now I picked it up for my Steam Deck and it runs really nice on the Steam Deck. So hopefully I get further than I did before. So I've been kind of chipping my way, making my way back through some of those initial planet, starting remembering some of the kind of ins and outs of the combat and the parries and the kind of navigation there. So this is 2019. I don't need to talk about this game very much except to say it is comfortable and runs really well on the Steam Deck, and I'm glad to have it in a portable fashion. Did I fill enough time for you there, GameLogIQ?
You did. Now, are these games that you picked up, and I didn't check to see, are you playing all of these on one system? Were these all games you picked up from Steam, or is it across?
Kind of cross section. So the original PlayStation Phantom Menace game is on PlayStation Premium or the whatever the high tier, one of the mid tiers there with the classics catalog. Racer I did pick up on Steam, but I played it on Xbox because I owned it, or I have it from Xbox Gold at one point in time. The Disney Infinity game I picked up a couple years ago when it first came out on Steam, where it just kind of bundled everything together. And probably, I think I got all three of them for $26 or something like that. So it really was just a matter of kind of going back through my existing catalog. And so the only thing I really picked up, I spent $6 on Star Wars games this weekend, because I've spent much more than that in previous weekends, and trying to, figure out something to go back and have a little bit of nostalgia, but also to pick at something that the Steam Deck allows me to do that I wouldn't normally. I don't know that I'd have the same time. I've had plenty of opportunities to come back to Fallen Order, and I haven't. So maybe the Steam Deck is part of the option there.
Yeah, I definitely took the opportunity to raid the Steam store and pick up some Star Wars stuff on sale. Can't remember exactly everything that I picked up, but I picked up Rogue Squadron, which I didn't realize. Maybe it was somewhere stored in a latent memory bank somewhere, but I didn't realize that game had a PC port. And all the time I've been complaining that I never had a GameCube, and that I keep wanting them to bring the game back and have them make it available on Nintendo Switch Online or whatever.
I had a physical disc of it for PC, right? Going back to our previous discussions of, just because I have a physical disc of it does not mean that I could play the PC version of Rogue Squadron. So yes, it's nice that it's that's such a fun, what is that? That is Factor 5. A couple of weeks ago when I was talking about Europa and talking about Factor 5, but I meant Level 5 in terms of Studio Ghibli, but Factor 5 is the Rogue Squadron people.
Yes, I picked that up. I picked up Star Wars Empire at War, which is one of my favorite RTSs. I loved it.
I'm surprised you didn't have that one. Yeah,
I was surprised too. I had a physical copy of that I got rid of when I got rid of my physical copies, and I loved it. One of the reasons I loved it so much was because I could not stand that Age of Empires reskin that
Galactic
they did.
Battlegrounds.
Yeah, I hated that, and I hated it more because I was with a group of people who loved it. So I was a big Empire Earth guy, and that's what I always wanted us to play for multiplayer LAN parties. But I would suck it up and have to play that Galactic Battlegrounds thing, and I just couldn't say it. And finally, Empire at War came along, and I'm like, yeah, this is what a Star Wars RTS is supposed to be.
Yeah, it actually takes advantage of some height aspects, and yeah. No, I remember playing. I owned a physical copy of Galactic Battlegrounds at one point in time as well. So,
all right. So, unfortunately, you guys are going to have to listen to me prattle on for a little bit. I will get us out of here on time. Originally, I had this sequence where I would do one game, and then DBQ would do his, and then I would do my last one, but we'll just peanut butter it all together. First game I want to talk about is I did get time this weekend to go back and play some Final Fantasy VII Remake on the PS5. Look, just isn't my kind of game, but I feel it's important enough of a title for me to grit my teeth and bear through it and trudge through more of it. Go ahead.
Pushing through a giant JRPG is one thing. Pushing into it enough to kind of understand what it is and then disengaging with it, I think is it. As someone who just said he never finished plenty of games, right? Like Fallen Order. Is this something that you are going to put in that rotation that you'll come back to every once in a while? Or is it you want to play it a little bit to understand what it is and know that it's not your jam?
What I really want to play is Rebirth, because I understand my belief from what I've heard is that there are some design and implementation changes in what Rebirth is in its campaign structure that will make it a little more palatable to me as far as it being a JRPG.
I think you watch some video and catch up on the story and jump into Rebirth.
I could. And And if it goes long enough and I start feeling that much pain, I may do that. That's not my norm. Normally, I was thinking about it, in fact, earlier today, and I can't remember why I was thinking about it, but I definitely came up with my own causality where I said, if a game isn't important enough for me to be willing to play it, I can't understand why I'd be willing to put the time into like watching a video of it. So I may go that route, but I mean, we'll see. I mean, it's also not an entire necessity for me to play Rebirth. It's on my list. It's on my radar. But you know, we'll just see how this goes. So the combat of Final Fantasy VII Remake is interesting enough for me. I'll call it like about a 78% on a 100 scale. I can't remember. There was another Final Fantasy game that I actually played where I thought the combat was a little more interesting, just in terms of kind of how the ATB was implemented. But yeah, this is fine. Occasionally I find the combat hits, usually when I'm fighting like the regular troops, and so there's more to do. And I feel like I have a chance to pull off some neat maneuvers that reward you with some applicable eye candy. But boss battles are largely an exercise in frustration that I feel like I pretty much like survive my way through it, and I'm not necessarily enjoying it. And it's not necessarily that graphically rewarding to me. You know, like I said, for right now, it's just kind of a thing that I guess I have to get through in order to play Rebirth. Granted, I'm taking that as a very austere entry, you know, path that I have to follow, that I'm totally loading and encumbering myself with. But that's just kind of where I am right now.
Wara, if you're still in the chat, I'd love to hear your thoughts, or at least let GameLogIQ read your thoughts in terms of as someone who has sunk as much time into Rebirth as you have. But yeah, I mean, I think it certainly gives you will have a better context and understanding of what you're doing in Rebirth by having played Remake. But I only got, I think my clock on Remake is 15, 18 hours. And I have not even invested that much time all the way through into Rebirth, but I find, like you said, things are smoothed out in terms of that, and they're also more opened up. Like Remake is a nice interactive movie, and Rebirth feels like I've got a little bit more choice and options there.
Yeah, and I guess part of this is me having entirely kept away from Final Fantasy VII, like through, you know, over the entire history, and hearing people constantly talk about Cloud and Tifa and Sephiroth, and like I've just never, I've always put people who love it, I mean, who love Final Fantasy in general, in a corner with like the super uber niche fandoms, you know, with the Bethesda people, you know, I mean, quite frankly, like the Pokemon people to a certain extent. So it's just a fandom that I've never identified with. To me, I'm playing it as a game because it has historical and industry and creative significance, right? And that's like the extent of it. And while I say that, I totally admit this is me as a total, complete dude bro gamer. Like, you know, this is not me being pretentious. This is not me talking down the game. This is me saying, you know, I drive, you know, if it were up to me, I would drive Mustangs, Mustangs, Camaros, and Chargers. And you can't expect somebody like me to, you know, appreciate a European exotic. Like, you know, unless it goes fast and makes a lot of noise, I'm probably not going to get into it. So,
right, I think that's the beauty of our conversations, right? Is that I'm not going to spend nearly. I can appreciate Call of Duty for what it is, but I'm going to opt for something else, and we provide a nice swath because of our perspectives. So, there's my segue for you.
And there we are. So, of course, I've been playing plenty of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, specifically Season 3 Reloaded, which dropped on May 1st. Season 3 Reloaded hit this week, and of course, I loaded it in the background, so it's really kind of nice, although my experience with it for Season 2 wasn't that great. But this time around, I was like, this is pretty neat that you can just kind of play the game, and it's just slowly, sipping and loading this thing in the background. It's also sometimes a little annoying. It's annoying when you don't understand what's going on. Like, you're looking at the ticker on BattleNet, like background loading. You're like, what is this? Like, what's going on? So, and again, this is me. Like, I played Call of Duty a lot, but I don't always necessarily go off and like dig in Google for all this really esoteric stuff. But at any rate, it's nice that it helps defray some of the problems you might see if you were to just, Season 3 Reloaded just dropped. Let me boot the game up, boot up BattleNet, download it, and start playing after the thing drops, because you're going to run into problems. I have not deliberately focused on trying to hit the new content. Again, I just haven't really played a lot of like the LTMs and LTEs in the game this year. I played them a lot with Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. Haven't so much on Modern Warfare 3, just because there's a ton of content in like the regular stuff. There are a couple new maps, and I've had a chance to play both of them in rotation, Grime and Checkpoint. Checkpoint is a seaside or harbor map. You can hear seagulls and the ocean waves in the background. I'm not as much a fan of that map. It feels a bit like Tanked and Six Star, which are maps that came in Season 2. They're very heavily oriented around a corridor shooter. They're flat maps. Quite honestly, they feel like an old-style, antiquated Doom map. Although Six Star has some services that you can mantle and some maintenance tunnels you can crawl through to take advantage of some limited verticality. As far as I can tell, there's not anything like that on Checkpoint. It's just a long, wide-open map with a couple of choke points on either side. There are some kind of corridory things kind of in the back. It offers some cover from shipping crates, but nothing that can really be used to much tactical advantage. And so really, when you're playing that map, it's just a war of attrition and kind of slinging bodies against the enemy and racing to engagement points when you spawn. It can yield some pretty intense and very concentrated firefights on either side of the map via those approaches. So I guess that's kind of neat, but that map in general is just not one of my favorite. I'm also not a super huge fan of Tanked, and I'm not a super huge fan of of Six Star. Grime is the other map that dropped this season with Season 3 Reloaded. Warwana mentions in the chat he's got to get back to COD. Grime improves on that formula a bit, the formula that I just talked about, and that it's even better than Six Star, although I've not warmed up to it yet. Again, some of the maps that have been in rotation. So Grime is kind of tier 2 kind of mappish. I've only got it once, in fact, in the rotation. I will say it lends itself a little bit more to a slower, more methodical pace, because you can encounter the enemy out of the blue almost as much as you can with the speeds of engagement that happen on Das House. Like Das House, you run around, you're gonna bump into somebody in like a door jam, and like it's gonna be a like floppy, fist fight, every single time. But there are some areas that are a bit more open. It doesn't offer the long firing lanes of emergency, but it does have some slight overlooks and defilades that you can use to change up tactical approaches. More than most maps that I can think of, sound reverberates in a way that makes it kind of easy to fix where the enemy is, and therefore you can kind of change some of your tactical approaches. Like I said, it does have some points of kind of slight elevation in some places where you can take cover that allows you to change up your plays that you're going to run. One thing that I'm curious about is that I don't see more people running around that map on Melee, although, like I said, I've only gotten it once because, like I said, sound carries really well. There's some very tight kind of enclosed corridory spaces, and even, like, a lot of the other areas that they have, like, there's partial cover, so you just get a lot of, like, okay, that guy's over there, that guy's over there. But in general, I'm having a good time with it. I'm continuing to... they keep seeding like just a handful of weapons each time. I'm doing weapon unlocks, not really bothering with any of the secondary. I used to try and level the secondary weapons, and I'm like, why am I messing with launchers? The only thing they ever give you is like stickers and new cosmetics for it. So why would I bother? So I'm only playing with handguns, but with this game, I have a hyper focus on handguns to the point where I think I have almost all of them unlocked with akimbo, so you can run around with dual pistols, and that's pretty neat. So having a good time with it. That game will continue to truck on, so XDefiant is going to have quite a fight on its hands. It'll be super interesting. DBQ, anything else you want to mention before we get out of here tonight?
No, I think that should do it. I think the XDefiant call out from the top of the show is a good way to wrap it up.
Yeah. Up next, I don't know. I'm going to continue to play Call of Duty. I want to get around to Warframe. I've got a couple more sessions of F1 22 that I definitely want to get in. And also want to, like I said, get back to Final Fantasy VII and continue trudging through that some more. Anything on your radar?
All your talk of F1 makes me want to get back to New Star GP, the kind of low poly racing game that I picked up on Steam Deck a couple months ago at this point. But
I also need to get you. There is another new game, kind of GP game. I've been following this guy. He's been doing pre-orders and stuff. Is it called? I think it's called SGSP or something like that. It's another kind of retro game. I've got to get you the name of that. I was hoping it would come up pretty early here in my feed because he's been tweeting very frequently as he's been closing in on launching into early access. So he's going to go kind of right from early access right into full release. It's a pretty short early access period. Yeah, I cannot find it.
Okay. Well, when you find it, let me know and we'll talk about it another week in the show, I'm sure.
I will. So for anybody who happened to join us for the live stream, we appreciate you. For anybody who happens to watch the archive version of this live stream on not on the Rounding Off Infinity, on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube, please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can just receive a notification whenever we post new content. We will be back next week at 8:45 p.m. ish. DBQ will be the man in the center seat, with myself and Tile Master providing backup. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. Play the games that you like. Come here to talk to us about the games that you love. Once again, my name has been GameLogIQ from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. Here with my co-host DBQ Hams. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for us. We're out of here.